How do I get rid of lower back pain? Sprains are when the tendons rip and tear. Strains are when the muscles rip and tear. Both require ice for the first 3 days, with 30 minutes on, 30 minutes off. Both require reduced use of the back for 7 to 10 days. And that may change based on the severity of the injury or if the disc gets injured. Compression with a belt that goes around your abdomen, as far as compressing it, that'll help you get around, but don't use it as an excuse to work at 100%. You still have an injury that could get hurt even worse. All sprains take 10 to 18 weeks to heal, and muscle's about half that. Just remember, use RICE, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Put a rolled up towel or a pillow underneath your knees so you can lift your legs up and get pressure off of your low back. Remember, rest, ice, compression, elevation, and use a bolster in bed. And get up like you're pregnant, where you turn on your side and push yourself up while your feet go over the edge of the bed. Some people will just lay down on the ground, on the floor, with their feet up on the couch. That's another good way to take pressure off the low back while it's healing. Avoid cortisone shots at all costs. Use that as a last resort. The back will get better without them. If you've enjoyed this information and would like to receive 20 free videos of the top questions people ask most about what is inflammation and pain and how to get rid of it, visit www.getridofmypainnow.com.